Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. I'm going to debate the motion this House believes that Muhammad Ali Jinnah was good. So, first of all, I am the proposition. Right. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the House. This House believes that Muhammad Ali Jinnah was good for multiple reasons. He is our saviour. It's just past 25th of December, a public holiday in Pakistan because of all he did to found Pakistan and save the people from oppression. Because he was educated and in many ways a model citizen, an inspiration, a role model to hundreds of millions of youths to this very day, over 70 years after his demise. Because he was a progressive Muslim and is a shining example of what Muslims can achieve to people of the faith around the world. And because he achieved what many held to be utterly unachievable, the creation of a new nation state in South Asia as a homeland for the Muslim community. But let me go through these one by one. Stanley Walpott, one of his famous biographers, an American academic, and I wish I could recall his precise words, saying that, not many people create a new country and change the map and alter the course of history, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah did all three. Things which only a few years earlier nobody think would come to pass. So Pakistan is his baby more than anybody else's. He'd been in the Congress Party, and he'd be very reasonable, been willing to work with Hindus, Sikhs, Christians and so forth, Parsis likewise, but he'd come to see that the Mohammedan community in South Asia could never expect fair play from the other religious communities, and that Islam was such a uniting force that it transcended caste, ethnicity, language, and so forth. And therefore, because Islam really is a whole lifestyle, it was meet that a state be founded, especially for the Muslim community. And he worked towards that goal, whilst never rejecting friendship with Hindus and those of other religions, so long as they were willing to be reasonable and make a few concessions to the Muslim minority. He was a highly educated gentleman, and he spoke English with perfect correctitude, having spent some time in London and being called to the bar at the age of only 20. And this required passing exams in Latin, which until the age of 18 he had no exposure to the Latin language. So this was very demanding indeed. So he was a man of some outstanding attainments and was one of the most renowned and successful lawyers in India prior to 1947. He'd really made a name for himself at the Bombay bar. He was also progressive. He's certainly not a fanatic, and he absolutely believed in women's rights. And as many people would know, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him, really advanced the rights of womenfolk. You look how Jinnah married for love, falling out with one of his dearest friends because he married that man's daughter. And he encouraged his sister Fatima's career. You may know Fatima Jinnah. She stood for the presidency in the 1960s and unfortunately was not elected to the highest office, which went to General Ayub Khan. But that may well have been because Ayub Khan fiddled the system with his so-called basic democracy. And really, Fatima Jinnah should have won the top spot. So he created Pakistan more so than anybody else. Allama Iqbal and a few others, they had called for Pakistan to be created, Chowdhury Rahmat Ali, and very few people thought this was going to happen. Even the name Pakistan was only invented in the early 30s, Punjabis, Afghans, Kashmiris, Sindhis, and so forth. And the Pakistan demand came around. It's only about 1940, that famous Lahore Declaration, which is commemorated by that obelisk in Lahore, that the name Pakistan was really attached to this to form a homeland for the Muslim community in both northeastern and northwestern India. And Jinnah himself said it appeared to be an impossible dream. But he was a consummate politician, and he made the most of the situation, not exploiting the situation, but simply to advantage his people. And those are the people he cared about, those are the people who were voting for him. And so he cooperated with the United Kingdom, and that's why he got what he wanted. If Congress had been a bit smarter, hadn't been non-cooperators, hadn't been so obstructive, then perhaps the British authorities would have been more sympathetic to them. Another point is this is the Second World War. There was no time to be making life more difficult for the authorities. if Jinnah had done that, if the Muslim League had not cooperated, the Allies might well have won the Second World War. Where would India and indeed Pakistan have been then if they'd been under the Japanese heel? However bad the British Raj was, it was mild in comparison to what Japanese rule would have been. And this is why Jinnah's name is exalted in Pakistan and around the globe. He's venerated by hundreds of millions of people, many of whom have never been anywhere near Pakistan. So he believed in equality before law. So though he demanded a Muslim homeland, he did not want a Shariat state. And this is a subtlety which is lost on many people today, unfortunately. And it's right that people should honour his memory and seek to emulate his manifold, magnificent achievements, saying that the minorities in Pakistan must be treated with justice. Unfortunately, it hasn't always panned out that way. I remember there was a very distinguished Pakistani civil servant, I think the functionary's name was Rodad Khan, and about 98 he penned an autobiography entitled A Dream Gone Sour about Pakistan. So there's been some misrule by Jinnah's successors because they're unworthy to fill his boots. And it's obviously a plaintive fact that he orphaned this fledgling state when it was only 1 year and 1 month old. Had he lived, things would have turned out so much more differently. So he did so much to save the Muslim community from oppression. You see the horrific attacks on Muslims, physical attacks, being in danger of genocide in 1947, and if there hadn't been a safe haven for Pakistan, then things would have turned out very differently. It's fascinating the way the same people who are often stalwart defenders of Israel will excoriate Pakistan. Israel set up as a safe haven for the Jewish community, but they won't tolerate the same for Muslims, which is the most preposterous hypocrisy and speaks of vicious anti-Muslim bigotry. I rest my case. So now I am the opposition. Well, Jinnah was not a good man. In fact, he was a very wicked man for many reasons which I'm about to outline. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the House, this man was a fraud and a hypocrite. This man brought about a cataclysm for South Asia, and the repercussions of that disaster are felt every day in a very real sense, because he did so much to almost perpetuate the British Raj, and because he sets a very bad example for politicians in Pakistan and elsewhere. But anyway, so let's start at the beginning. To say that he cared about Muslims is really a nonsense. He was a hypocrite. He had a barely disguised disdain for the needy of all ethnicities. He lived in opulence, and he never shared any of his filthy lucre with the penurious masses. Saying he cared about Islam was just twaddle. He could drink you under the table. Jinnah's surname was precisely one syllable too long. It should simply have been Jinn, which he cared about far more than his faith. And yes, he eloped with the daughter of a friend of his and got married, and his friend cut him dead, and that poor young woman, she never got to see her family again. So much for family values. But when his own daughter did the self-same thing, he also cut her off without a penny, never spoke to her again, which was grossly hypocritical. How heartless could he be? So yes, he had been in Congress, and really this was a British plot to weaken the nationalist movement by helping the Muslim League be set up. And it was leaked in secret memos that the Muslims were to get more representation than they should have per capita, simply in order to split Muslims and Hindus, to set them at each other's throats. It was divide et impera at its foulest. And Jinnah was also a Johnny-come-lately to the cause. Remember, the Muslim League, only in the late 30s, they embraced the idea of a homeland for Muslims, which didn't necessarily mean completely separating from India, which might have been some degree of autonomy, redrawing some provincial boundaries. It's only that Pakistan declaration, Lahore Declaration, let's call it by its proper name, that they said, no, we actually want to separate. The word Pakistan doesn't even appear in the Lahore Declaration, not once. So it was only at the dying breath of British India that Pakistan came into being by sheer fluke. So he never risked himself. He had a contumacious attitude towards those who did risk life and limb for the cause of sovereignty and freedom. And think that there were Muslims who were gallantly battling in Congress, in the Indian National Army and so forth, for the liberation of South Asia in general, and not just Muslims and not just Hindus. Look, think of the frontier Gandhi, for example, a man of the most outstanding moral courage who doesn't get the credit that he deserves, and a pacifist at that. And the idea that people in the Punjab and Bengal had a great deal in common was really for the birds. They've got loads in common with each other, but not with their Hindu neighbours. This is daft. As Viscount Mountbatten said, the Punjabis and the Bengalis are as similar as the Greeks and the Finns. And in the Greeks and the Finns, yes, they're both Christians, but that's about the only point of commonality. So his cause had minimal support in Bangladesh, and we all know what happened with this preposterous notion of having a two-winged country with 1,000 miles of hostile territory in between. It was sure to end in grief, and it certainly did. It was on the rocks within 24 years, just as the last viceroy had prophesied. So the partition of India was foreshadowed by the partition of Bengal in 1905, when Viscount Curzon of Kedleston was Viceroy of India. And of course, Congress had vigorously lobbied against that, and the decision had eventually been reversed as one of the events which led to the creation of the Muslim League. And it didn't prefigure the bloodshed, though. And you think of, my goodness, at least 100 people slaughtered in 1947, all of which was avoidable. And you think of the great upheaval of the lack of commerce between India and Pakistan, which has immensely impoverished hundreds of millions of people in South Asia, and it didn't have to happen. It was completely avoidable. It was all because of his megalomania. It was Jinnah's sheer vanity. He wanted to create a country, and yes, this fledgling state had many problems, and it didn't need to be a fledgling state at all. You know, and so many Hindus who say worked in public sanitation fled, and so many people were murdered for their faith, Hindus and Sikhs, and indeed Muslims as well. And nobody should be killed for their faith or discriminated in any way. But the idea that people couldn't live in peace, that necessarily led to people killing each other. And so many people lost everything, which is poverty-stricken, and there was immense upheaval, and so many people were displaced. Right after the Second World War, more people were on the move. There were more refugees in India and Pakistan than anywhere else in the world. And you look at the 3 declared wars since, the frozen conflict in Jammu and Kashmir, the repeated terrorist attacks in India, and that's all Jinnah's doing. So it was all completely avoidable, and this terrible historic mistake can be rectified. There are nuclear weapons in both India and Pakistan now, and that might have been avoided. But even if there was a united India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, part of India, might have nuclear weapons, but only one nuclear arsenal, which would be half the money. Imagine if this terrible historic mistake and tragedy had not taken place, if India had not undergone vivisection, if there had not been this frontier lacerating the face of India as there is now, then India, united India, would have a combined population of 1.5 billion. It would be the most populous country on earth. It would be larger than China in population. Its military spending could be so much lower because there wouldn't be India and Pakistan against each other. It would be the same country. And obviously there would be a great deal more trade, which would enrich everybody. It would be a freer, more prosperous and happier country living in peace. And you know, it's just gone down the pan. There's no question that India wins the beauty contest against Pakistan, where there isn't freedom of conscience. And it was all based on this absolutely bogus notion that Hindus would not allow equality to Muslims. No, it's Pakistan doesn't allow equality to the religious minorities. India's elected 2 Muslim presidents. In Pakistan, non-Muslims are forbidden to be president, forbidden from all sorts, and subject to regular terrorist attacks. And blasphemy is punishable by death, and blah, 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 and there's so many honour killings. I know India has her problems, but there are many splendid things about India. You know, look at India, look at Pakistan. India has all this good stuff, Pakistan has none of that good stuff, and all the bad stuff India has, Pakistan has, only worse. So Muhammad Ali Jinnah has got a great deal to answer for. He has brought untold woe to hundreds of millions of people, and it was all for the sake of him showing off, pursuing this monomania of his, the notion that there should be a homeland created for Muslims, which was always going to lead to a religiously based state. And it's true that not all the mistakes and misjudgments since his death have been his cause, have been due to him. They all would have been avoided if Pakistan had simply stayed within India. So there we are, we're paying the price decades on, and there's really no end in sight. So I beg to oppose this monstrous motion, because Jinnah was certainly a deeply evil man.